Buon pomeriggio, Italia. Good afternoon, Italy from the Philippines. What do we really know about the agony and victory of Italy in time of the coronavirus? This afternoon, we're happy to have with us Dr. Raffaele Marchetti, Italy's premier political scientist and editorialist from Libera Universita Internazionale degli Studi Siociali, popularly known as the Guido Carli of Rome, as we discuss Italy's all-out war against the pandemic. Good afternoon, Professor Marchetti.
Good morning to you, or good afternoon.
Yes, good morning there from Rome. Well, we have wide range issues to discuss in our conversation. Let me begin with my questions. First of all, a beautiful day in Italy. Right now, we're seeing a flattening of the curve of the coronavirus disease in Italy after your government recently eased restrictions as bars and cafes are reopening. We hope there's no second wave of the virus in your country. But only in January, the COVID-19 outbreak began to attack major cities in northern Italy, and national lockdown came too late to be imposed, according to some critics. Can you share with us why Italy succumbed to the disease and how your nation became Europe's most vulnerable and also the world's epicenter?
Okay. Well, first of all, we need to say that only part of the country was severely hit. The center, Rome, where Rome is, where I am, and the southern part of Italy was relatively unaffected. Today, in many regions in the north, there are almost zero new cases. So the country was effectively split into two. Yes, the country in the north, especially in the Lombardy region around Milan, which is the economic center of Italy, has been severely hit. Why it happened? Well, first of all, we need to say that there are some misperceptions, I think, which are due to the fact that Italy was the first country in Europe really to be hit. But if you look at numbers now, we see that, for instance, in percentage term, Belgium or UK or Spain have more viruses cases than Italy. So it is a bit of a misperception to think that Italy was the most severely hit country. At the same time, of course, there were many deaths. Why this happened? Well, on the one hand, of course, there were some problems of health management. Cases were recorded in elderly sort of hospitals, in health structures. So these were important cases that really contributed to the spread of the virus. There are other aspects that we are still really studying. At the end of the day, it's not entirely understandable why certain regions, certain cities were more hit than others. For instance, in Lombardy itself, certain minor cities were much more hit than the capital of the region, that is Milan. And you would expect that the metropolitan city, the biggest one, which is also highly globally interconnected, many other regions of the world, would have been hit more. But this was not the case. We still need to understand very well what happened. This will come, of course, an in-depth study will be carried out, but only later on, I think, when all the problem is solved.
All right, but you know, Italians, particularly those from the medical sector, who later on became your brave frontliners, were unaware of the novel coronavirus because it's new. 3 weeks before the epidemic in Italy, mass gathering in sports events was prevalent, and I assume they even ignored social or physical distancing and the domestic factor on the cultural issue of not wearing the mask. Venice and other parts of Italy have gone to several plagues based from your country's epidemiological history, which could have been your edge. But how come Italy seems unprepared for this pandemic, aside from what you discussed early on in my first question?
Well, there was an underestimation of the virus.
Right.
For a long time, this was considered an Asian virus only, an
Right.
Asian problem only. And in fact, Italy was really the first European country to be hit. So in that sense, we were the first on the line, and we had to sort of adjust quickly. In fact, all European countries somehow struggled to react. I mean, you remember that France had held elections 2 days before locking down the entire country. An election means people queuing one after the other for voting. So there was, I would say, a large underestimation of the threat in Italy, in Europe, but also in many other countries. I mean, we also might consider about the US, how slowly they reacted. But at some point, important policy decisions were taken. Italy was locked down, which proved quite effective in reducing the spread. And as a matter of fact, today the numbers are going drastically down. Of course, other side effects are emerging, namely the economic downturn. I mean, this will be a big problem for the future. We are already seeing now many unemployed people, many companies that are going out of the business. So I would say at the moment, really the focus is very much on the economic recovery.
But Dr. Marchetti, can we also attribute it to the aging population that is happening right now in Italy? The reason why, because based from medical studies that the geriatric population are the most vulnerable in the COVID-19, it seems like.
Yes, it is a combination of efforts. Definitely, the age of the population, it is something. And Italian population is slightly older on average than other populations. But the difference is not so big at the end of the day. I mean, it's not that the Italian population is much older than the French, the German, or It's a combination of elements, of course, age, demographic, health policies, policy responses from the government, but I would also say techniques of measurements. Italy was very sort of adopted a measurement technique that accounted for many deaths. Other countries adopted a more restrictive measurement. And because, you know, I mean, if you are sick of cancer and then you die, did you die for cancer or did you die for COVID-19? Depending on how you count, depending on how you measure it. So Italy was quite large, adopted quite an encompassing measurement technique. At the end of the day, I think we really lack reliable data because we only take the numbers that each government provides, which really are dependent on the different techniques. I think a more reliable method would be to see the difference between the rate of mortality in the previous years and the rate of mortality this year. But this is not a method used by governments. Rather, as I said, the World Health Organization rely on the data that are provided by the government, but each government uses a different measurement technique. So there is a big issue here. Also, I mean, think about the wide divergences and differences in the different regions of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and it's a bit strange to think about such big differences. So we really need to think carefully about the numbers. I mean, there is a political aspect also into that. Numbers and the politics of measurement, it's an important aspect of international affairs.
Yeah, since we're speaking about the political measurement of the number there, the spike of confirmed cases and increasing number of deaths from the disease was really alarming, coming from, of course, from the outside Italy. The world felt how Italy was crumbling in your all-out war campaign against the COVID-19. We know for a fact that Italy has survived 2 world wars, the civil wars in their colorful and proud history. But how did the government counter all these medical handicaps in your healthcare system, given that you have one of the sophisticated medical systems, healthcare systems in the world?
Well, yes, I mean, traditionally the health system in Italy was considered quite good, according to international rankings, was considered one of the top, really, health system in the world. It is true that, especially in the northern region, things have changed in the last few years. There was a wave of privatization. There was a bit of a transformation of the health system in Italy. And we are discovering now that some procedures were highly inadequate. For instance, we are now discovering cases of contagion passed from doctor to patients, because doctors were not forced or not, I mean, adequate provisions were not in place to make sure that the contagion could not spread inside hospitals. So there were some problems there, and we are investigating that. At the same time, as I said, I mean, other regional health system worked better in Italy. There was a big issue, I think, which was present also in many other countries, the tension between the central government and the regional government.
Right,
Similar
right.
to what is happening now in the U.S. between the federal government and the states. Sometimes they managed to cooperate fairly well, but other times there were tensions, especially when the central government and the regional governments have different political colors, if you want. So I think that was part of the story. A bit of a lack of coordination was also visible in these countries.
Right, right. Now let's talk about the message of hope. I don't know if I would pronounce it properly. Andra, tutto, bene. Everything will be all right. Spread across Italy. And the world saw how Italians united and fought back together to weather the lockdown. Resisti, Italia, Andra, tutto, bene. Is this a trademark of Italian fighting spirit, or it just came out naturally during the pandemic?
No, I mean, the pandemic really brought, I think, a significant rediscovery of communal sentiments.
Right.
The fact that you were forced to be at home, spending more time with your family, somehow interacting with your neighbors. I mean, here on the terraces, from the window, it was a long period in which every day at 6, everybody was going to the window and start singing and talking. And so this was really, I think, an important moment of communal rediscovery, which is still somehow present, though, of course, now we are quickly going back to normal, or to new normal, if you want. That was important, and also the fact of working from home. I mean, this is smart working.
Right.
Everything contributed to rediscovery, a more, if you want, genuine or understanding of how life can be lived. This is an important asset of this pandemic, which brought also, surprisingly, some positive effects on society.
Right. And then, of course, let's talk about your bilateral relationship with China. But, before that, China and Cuba came to help Italy by sending their physicians and medical specialists while you were combating the disease. And particularly for China, how do you describe the Italy and China bilateral relationship? But before the pandemic, I know Rome inked several economic and trade agreements with Beijing, and here comes the outbreak. How is Italy taking all this agony? Does Italy still see a brighter bilateral friendship with China?
Well, Italy is a contested territory, if you want. I mean, Italy, of course.
Right. Okay. Can you expound about that?
Is a strong member of the European Union, also an important member of NATO, and a strong ally of the US. At the same time, Italy has always had some kind of positive relationship with the others, with Russia, with China, to some extent also with Iran. And it's clear, and it was clear, that in a moment of vulnerability, in a moment of struggle, many came to help Italy. China, Russia, Cuba, Albania, European partners, also the US. There was a kind of competition
of support. Yeah.
Precisely. Of course, I mean, there was a humanitarian sort of reason, but it was also for political reasons. I mean, aid is politics. So through aid, you show you are helping the country, creating a kind of future debt. At the same time, you create a hierarchy, because if you're able to help the others, means you are a kind of superior to the others. It was interesting because in the media, the aid from China and Russia was much more advertised than the aid from the Western allies.
Okay.
And for these, and of course for a number of other reasons, the public sentiment changed a bit. There was a poll, very interesting poll, run during the pandemic, according to which more than 50% of the Italians considered China the top friend country of Italy. While only around 20 something percent consider Europeans or US the top friendly country for Italy, which was an unprecedented result, something that generated worries in Italy, in the establishment, of course, worries also in Washington. And as a matter of fact, after a few weeks, the US announced a very substantial financial package of help for Italy, somehow to compensate this. So I think, I mean, on the overall, Italy remained strongly anchored in the Western US-led system. At the same time, we cannot underestimate the impact that this kind of helps, and especially the impact that the future solution of the problem might have on Italy as well as on many other countries in Europe. Really, it will be important to see which is the country that will be able to tackle most effectively the health issue, the economic issue, the recovery issue, the country that will be able to project itself as the genuine and honest winner in this competition. And we have seen that the World Health Organization part of the struggle, part of the competition last week. So really, I would say that the game is still open, and clearly, pandemic was also an opportunity for public diplomacy for all countries, not only for China, for Russia, but also for the US, including for small countries like Albania. Really gained a lot of popularity and visibility. The tiny Albania, I mean, Albania is a small country. But Albania was able to project itself as a donor, as somebody who could provide relief, which was a clear victory for the Albanian government.
Wow, despite also the domestic issue on COVID pandemic in their country, right? Okay, there was a recent polling that alarmingly revealed about the perceptions of Europeans turning away from the United States under President Donald Trump's leadership. In my recent interview with Professor Carly Taylor, where he mentioned Professor Amitav Acharya's views on multiplexity of the world order, where they see various coalition of states and non-states and between states that are rapidly changing, and even alliances are evolving at the moment caused by the game changer COVID-19. How will Europe confront the EU and US dilemma and at the same time respond to the challenging pressures of the new normal in foreign relations?
Well, it's clear that the world is going through a phase of repolarization, in which every country is under pressure to take a stance, a position with one or the other would-be leader in the world. I'm meaning US or China. I would say that Italy and Europe are strongly sort of anchored to the U.S. Sphere of influence.
Right.
At the same time, the EU is also trying to sort of create some space for keeping the door open to China. It's entirely impossible to think about an entirely compartmentalized system in which the EU does business, does politics, does any other kind of interaction only with the US. I mean, this would be self-defeating. And this also because, and this is really part of the problem, the US government has not shown a particular sort of positive engagement with Europe. There were cases which really generated some hunger. There was a case in which it was revealed the U.S. government was trying to buy the recipe for a kind would-be vaccine, taking it as an exclusive from a German company. As a matter of fact, depriving European of the access to that vaccine. So these cases and other cases really generated some kind of resentment. So, I mean, I would say Europe still very much remain a kind of part of the Western Bloc. Some doors are open. Intense pressure is put on Europe to align more firmly with the US and shutting the door with China. At the same time, there would be costs on doing this. So it's a matter for a political compromise, I think.
Right. And only 3 days ago, the European Commission approved an additional 30 billion euros in humanitarian aid to help respond to the dramatic increase in humanitarian needs caused by the pandemic. And before that, there's an additional humanitarian funding of 20 billion euros in development and emergency funding from the Commission and EU members for short-term and long-term needs as part of the Team Europe approach. And we know for a fact that national coffers are draining loosely in almost all governments worldwide. And it's a fact that the world suffers from our own great depression right now. You're talking about the economic effects earlier on. If the pandemic worsens and cannot be controlled by the end of the year, from a neo-realist perspective, the more the world gets anarchic. What would be your prognostics on this future scenario?
I am very worried for the future in economic terms, not much in health terms. I think we will be able to manage it. In Europe, there has been an intense debate on how to recover from this and how to mutualize, how to sort of share the burden of this recovery fund, as it is called. Some countries were much more resistant and reluctant to think about the Europeanization of the debt. It seems, I mean, and a final decision has not yet been taken, but an important agreement was struck last few days ago by France and Germany to neutralize and making a kind of common engagement for this recovery fund. It is, I would say, it is very important. In fact, Europe really developed from crisis through crisis. It is in the moment of crisis that Europe managed to relaunch its project. This has always happened since the beginning of the European project. So I really hope that this crisis will also provide a further opportunity for strengthening and relaunching the integration process. It's not entirely certain because there are many resistances. There are also analysts who argues that this crisis might lead to the end of the European Union, generating more exits, like more Brexit-style dropping out of countries.
Right,
I
right.
would say this is not the predominant understanding, interpretation, but there are some analysts who argue that along this way. I do think we will find a compromise. We will share resources for the relaunch of the European project. But of course, this will come with some costs, especially for countries that are struggling for the recovery. Italy, Spain, France, countries that have already some economic difficulties vis-a-vis, for instance, the German outperformance. At some point, there will be important decisions, and if we decide to mutualize and to share the burden for the recovery, this will at the same time mean both a more sort of collective response, but at the same time a more intrusive European policies in domestic politics, which is a part of the game of regional integration. The more you integrate, the more the regional organization is able to sort of interfere in domestic politics. There is a trade-off here, and many governments are asking for more collective responses, which is fair, but this also will entail for the future more sort of cession of national sovereignty.
Right, right. And lastly, Italy is known as a global tourism powerhouse. What will happen to Italy if tourism and hospitality industry will get hurt for a few more years?
This will be a serious problem. A significant part of the national GDP is tourist related. Simply put, we cannot afford to lose that important economic sector of the national economy. In fact, I mean, this is a problem not only for Italy, but also for many other European countries. Europe is a top tourist destination.
Right, right.
The same applies for UK, for France, partly for Germany, for Spain, for sure, Greece. For the moment, we are reopening the mobility inside Europe, inside Italy, which will be already an important push for relaunching a bit of tourism inside Italy. There is also an ongoing discussion to reopen a European-wide space for mobility, which will be, again, a push for European, intra-European tourism. Of course, what is missing now is the global tourism, I mean, non-European tourists. This is a problem. I'm sure when the situation is recovered, Italy will become again a top tourist destination. The problem is when this cannot come too late, because already from now we are seeing many hotels, many restaurants, many kind of tourist residences struggling, and some of them are shutting down, some of them are closing down. So this is a serious problem. Many people are employed in this sector, and we should really find a solution as soon as possible, because it's too important for me.
Right, right. But I believe Italy will survive this pandemic. You've always been inspiring the world for your Andra, tutto bene. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dr. Raffaele Marchetti. Grazie al mio buon amico. Thank you, my good friend Raffaele.
Thank you to you. I mean, it was a pleasure to talk to you and the Philippines and international.
Okay. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.